One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio. Another session, another week. A very interesting update from around the world on what is going on, as well as interesting news. This week has started with tariffs. Everybody's talking about tariffs, and the stock markets are trembling and they're falling down all over the world. The interesting thing about tariffs is that who is going to be a winner going forward remains to be seen. And in many cases, I think financial markets have underestimated in many ways the impact of this. We have a strengthening dollar, we have inflation, and we have sustainability related issues that are becoming more and more alarming around the world. James, welcome to One Step Ahead Radio. Once again, nice to have you here.
Yes. Hi, Sasha. Good to see you and hear you again. And welcome to everybody listening to us, wherever you are.
James, there has been some interesting reports coming out on the impact of sort of the damages that will be caused by warming planet. There are many reports out there on this. The one that we wanted to start this session with is the one that you sort of wanted to elaborate a bit more on. What is this about?
Yeah, no, obviously, we're not going to talk about tariffs. We're going to be one of the only outlets not talking about tariffs this week. We could talk about that at length anyway, but that's a very short-term, near-term element that's here. And what we're trying to focus on perhaps is a few stories about the longer term trends and where we're going in terms of the impacts of climate change and the transformation of our energy industry and consumption and energy systems. So the IEA is talking about their annual survey of energy demand, which is starting to rise again, even in advanced economies. So the headline is that energy demand surged in 2024 almost twice its recent average. And what I found interesting was the acceleration in global energy demand was led by the power sector, up 4.3%. And it was driven by record global temperatures, boosting demand for cooling in many countries, as well as rising consumption from industry, electrification of transport, and the growth of data centers and artificial intelligence. But I was struck, about the kind of the contradictory dynamic that's going on in terms of energy demand being driven by a warming planet.
Yeah.
And since the outlook, we keep on talking, or a lot of people talking now about, is 1.5 degrees alive, and where are we, and where are we going? Every 0.1, every 0.01 increase in temperature has these enormous ramifications that are going to play through. We've kind of embedded these increases in temperature into our system, into our planetary system now, and these is just the beginning that we're starting to see of the implications for our energy demand. So that was what I was. That's the first point that I wanted to sort of talk about. From your perspective.
Yeah, I have these kind of first-hand experiences with increasing need for cooling. Spending sort of a time in Japan in July, August, it's almost unbearable from a physical point of view because it's so extremely hot, and it's becoming hotter and hotter. And what is also quite obvious, and we can see that from investment point of view, that the companies that are developing solutions for cooling, both on the factory sort of aside for the workers, but also different kinds of equipment, is becoming more and more in demand. And in Japan last year, it was this expo on the cooling, which was a very big expo in Tokyo, where the companies were looking at the ways how they can protect their workers from increasing the warming sort of a heat shocks that they are exposed to. But in this regard, when you think about this, and in the same time looking at what U.S. banks are doing, James, there is a playbook that banks, especially in the U.S., have been using for the last couple of years, stating and indicating their sincere commitments to diversify their investments towards more renewable energy. That is rapidly changing now. Many of the Wall Street banks are now exploring a new ways how to plunge, I would say, capital and money into the quite controversial type of fossil fuel sites around the world, including Arctic and some other. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, it seems to be, sort of let's dust down the old playbooks and make money on wherever we can. So a lot of the commitments that have been made over the last years, I mean, commitments, policies, lending policies, we're talking about what you're going to finance, what you're not going to finance, what you're actually going to put your dollars or your euros behind in terms of oil sands, in terms of coal. So, speaking from a European perspective, a lot of the European banks have had these very strong moves in the last few years to sort of exit these investments and these lending and these business areas, whereas they're now going to have to think hard because the US banks are charging back and looking again at what they've been doing, despite I mean, to a certain extent, we've talked in the last few weeks about the famous net zero banking alliance being sort of emptied of
dismantled, basically. Yeah.
So it's kind of the question for the banks is, are they going to be driven by those short-term opportunities and gains that they see, regardless of the cost? Because they say, okay, well, the administration, the US government doesn't believe in net zero anymore, so why should we build our business model around it? But as we said before, climate change is having an impact today, and that's going to impact their balance sheet for decades to come. So it's a very interesting dynamic that's going on at the moment.
And as we know, I mean, the investments in renewable energy sources around the world compared to fossil fuel sort of resources need to increase rapidly. And there is this dilemma about the amount of capital that is invested in what we call the future solutions and the amount of capital that is invested in what we in many ways could demand sort of a deem as old economy. That needs to be taken into account, because every dollar invested in renewable energy is now basically working against $4 to $5 invested in new fossil fuel expansion, which is one of the big topics, and people don't necessarily always understand this. The pension money, the savings, the investments have much bigger impact on the transition than they would think. Although all the symbolic stuff they're doing is of course very important, but using capital flows and the global economic engine being financial industry could create much more rapid change. And when we talk about that, James, there is a difference between the US and Europe, and that difference is also reflected in the latest news that DWS, the part of the Deutsche Bank, which is the case that is fairly old, has been now in the court ordered to pay 25 million euros a penalty fee for over selling or mis-selling green credentials. Any views from you? I mean, it looks like Europe is still working, and it seems that European authorities are actually doing what they're supposed to do, which is to oversee that banks are not misguiding their clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a cautionary tale, and it's a significant amount of money in terms of they already settled in 2020. Remind me, 2020. 2023. And this whole greenwashing, it was a very emblematic case at the time that DWS had overstated, and also because of a whistleblower who was their head of ESG, came out and said they were making misleading statements in their annual report as well about the size of their ESG assets. So I think it's something that, as you say, European rules and regulations actually have a cost and an effect on how banks are selling their ESG investment or their responsible investments, and I think that's going to be there's a real sea change between how it's going to play out in Europe and how it's going to play out in the US. Obviously, these are global organizations. So, as we've said before, there's a regionalization issue that's coming up.
I mean, there is this thing about the banks. I mean, we've been discussing banks in various forms and shapes now, but there's another thing which has caught my attention the last sort of a couple of weeks, and it has been on for some time, is related to this huge push to use a sustainable investment label on bullets and bombs. And this is for me, as a person who has experienced the war on my own skin, a bit of a sort of a tricky one, because I don't understand why. I have no problem, by the way, that investors are investing in weapon industry, defense sector, whatever it's called. But why such a big need to sort of label these investments as sustainable? And there is also another thing which is, at least in European context, quite tricky, is that the EU regulation in many ways is developed and shaped in that way that investors, by using the formula of doing no significant harm, actually cannot, by the SFDR regulation in many ways, which stipulates the classification of sustainable investments, cannot really do that. So I don't know, James, what's your take on it? But why do we need to label things like bullets and bombs as sustainable? Why is that so important? I don't know.
There's it's been one of those eternal issues that for many people is a complete it goes back to the ethical the ethical investing trend, which which is where we started out maybe 25 years ago, and it was very much a sort of a moralistic issue around certain issues, in the same with whether it's gambling or pornography or cigarettes, etc. Certain taboo industries were considered uninvestable, and arms and defense as well. And I think it's an issue that really divides the whole sustainability profession, and probably the ESG one as well, in terms of how much do you want to stand by that? And for some people, it really is, a fundamental principle of their wish not to invest in anything that goes towards military expenditure or arms and weapons, and they want to know that. So if you're making so they think if you're making an ESG investment, then you're going to be aligned with that on a moral sense. So it's going to be another thing that's going to be very difficult for people. We've talked before about, did you realize your ESG pension fund's investing in oil and gas or coal, whatever? And now it's going to be the same thing. Did you realize that they're investing in arms and defense? And people will sort of be up in arms. My own investment is with an organization that's been very vehemently against that, and is now talking a lot about that, saying, we continue to be excluding all of these industries. So it's good that they are very clear with me as a user, as a customer. They're crystal clear about it and their position and why. And I think that's important for banks and asset managers to be clear about that. I saw the Norwegian pension, the sovereign wealth fund, not attacked, but it's becoming a political ball now, saying it's a crazy that they're banning, that we can't use their investments from this fund to invest in European defense. So it's becoming a political ball as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that what I think it's sort of a bit scary is the fact that we have this sort of a urge to label various kinds of things, as sustainable just for the sake of being on the right sort of a moral side of the discussion, because the morality of these investments basically lies in the perception that the money can be used to protect democracy and protect our way of life, which is for many people, of course, one of the most important things. But in the same way, nobody's talking about de-escalating. Nobody's talking about investing in solutions that will bring peace to many of these conflicts around the world, which leads me to a discussion about the increase, most likely, a level of conflicts, which is related to the latest report that I've seen has been done on the cost related to temperature rise due to climate change. And as it seems, the average person, based on this report, will be 40% poorer if world warms by 4 degrees. That's a new research, James. That's quite obvious. I mean, we know that. But the question is, why is this not bigger news than it actually is? Because as we said, we discussed tariffs in the beginning. Everybody wants to talk about that. But there are other things that will lead to increased conflicts and also a lot of more people being poor.
Yeah.
So I don't really get why this is not a bigger news than it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And concerning also when you read about experts and scientists, Australian scientists in this case, saying, it's going to be worse than the economic effects are going to be greater than previously estimated, which takes us back to the discussion we were having at the beginning. And I'm sorry I didn't kind of flag it earlier, but obviously in terms of the effects of climate change on our energy system, on our supply chains, obviously there's a huge equality and inequality issue around that, is who's going to bear the price. You're talking about air conditioning. We have to think about the people who don't have air conditioning.
Yeah,
People
and
have
their
to
bills.
work in those conditions, and they have to live, and they're going to get harsher and more extreme. So these are very a lot of ramifications for this kind of news. So yes, disturbing outlook, as it were, and I think it's going to be interesting also to come back to the very beginning point about tariffs.
Yeah.
Is how these are going to play out in terms of changing supply chains and what that means in a changing environment and a changing climate landscape, because people are going to be very driven by monetary and emergency needs. I'm wondering about how the big corporations are going to rethink their supply chains in light of this week's announcements and what that could mean about resilience and economic inequality and opportunities around the world. So there's a lot of turbulence in the moment that's going to affect people very, very, very deeply.
And I'm also thinking, from sometimes when we talk about these macro things, there are also things that are related to micro level, which you mentioned in terms of the billions of people, and especially developing countries, that will have to continue working and living in the conditions that will become more more harsh in so many different ways. And then you have this connection with increasing conflict levels, refugee streams from different parts of the world. It's becoming much more unstable, but there are positive things. And one of the positive things is that the UK carbon emissions fell by 4% last year, according to the official figures. James, this is very good. And I'm happy to see that UK is on the right path. Now, with that said, UK government, the current one, is also exploring the ways how to increase production of oil and gas in the North Sea. So what's the thinking behind this? Because they are apparently delivering, but at the same time, not really thinking about that long term.
Yes, no, well, the UK is still trying to stand up to its long tradition in terms of climate leadership. So it was good to see, above all, decarbonisation efforts in the electricity and energy sector keep on doing that. The big issue, in the UK is household energy bills. People, it's a real political hot button, and sort of energy independence. The debate that goes on all around the world at the moment of saying, there are reports that come out and say, well, if we, could rely on our North Sea, it's left in there, that we wouldn't have to, be subject to anybody else's, imports, and we could be, rule Britannia again. We love to be on our island and independent and everything. So that's going to be a very, very strong tension going forward there as well. But good to see that, and also good to see, I know that you're here in Milan with us at the moment. It's a sunny day. In Europe, it's been very sunny end of March, beginning of April, and it's whacking electricity prices. There's a surplus of solar energy above all. We've been installing lots of solar panels, and we keep on talking about, the statistics of the investment that's been going into that industry now, and we're seeing it in terms of negative power prices even during the week. So that's going to be a topic for the spring and the autumn and the summer, because If it's going to be fair weather in Europe, it's going to be big time for solar production.
And that sort of stipulates another discussion. Maybe we will come back to that in one of our future interviews with some of the guests that we are planning for One Step Ahead radio sessions going forward, which is related to storage. I mean, the storage is a big business. It will become big business, especially in relation to solar power, and because of the balancing of the grids, and also the way how the pricing could look like going forward. As you said, James, it's a paradox that now the cheap solar energy is basically disrupting the markets and overwhelming grids with a cheap power. It is interesting development, and as always, James, thank you very much for this week reflections, comments, thoughts, and ideas. And we encourage everybody listening to One Step Ahead Radio to join us again next week and share with your friends, family, and people you think should be part of the community of One Step Ahead Radio, where we share views and opinions and reflections from what's going on around the world. Many thanks, James, again.
Thanks to you, Sasha. Have a good day, and thanks to everybody. See you again soon.
See you. Bye.